Hello, welcome to At Home in Dublin with Ricky Porter. This is a television show that is dedicated to showing the best of Dublin. We feature individuals who are movers and shakers, people of interest, people who make Dublin a special place to be. TV 35 has thought it best to try to show that Dublin is indeed a metropolitan city, a cosmopolitan city, growing every day, with artists, professionals in various fields. And so this television show, At Home in Dublin, features those individuals and others who will help you to see that we are a fine and wonderful place to be. Today, I am going to be visiting with Mr. Kenneth Hodges, a person that I got to know several months ago, and the more I got to know about him, the more fascinated I have become. You introduced me to this PBS documentary regarding My Lai, related to the Vietnam War. And this documentary spoke about it as being one of the dark chapters in the Vietnam War. And I'm going to be asking you a little bit about that. You also gave me an article that featured you in the Courier Herald on Thursday, November 10th, 2011. And I'll speak a little bit about that too. But the real reason why I wanted to interview you for this television program has more to do with Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. As you know, we are approaching the 39th anniversary of his assassination. He was born on January 15th, 1929, and assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And I understand from my previous conversations with you that you served 2 tours of duties in Vietnam, 1967 of November through 1968 of November, and then a second tour that began in June of 1969. The war itself roughly spans 1955 to 1975. But the question that I have for you, Martin Luther King was opposed to the war, and many other Americans were opposed to the war. And so my first question to you, Kenneth, is what is your feeling, your thoughts about a war that you participated in, that so many Americans, including Martin Luther King, was opposed to? What's your initial reaction to that?
Well, my initial reaction to it as a soldier is that it was another tour of duty. A soldier receives, obeys, and carries out the orders that he's given. A soldier does not have that luxury of choosing whether he should or shouldn't go. He don't have the luxury of deciding whether it's a moral or immoral war. He's just, as the old saying goes, not to question why, but to do and die. And I was a career soldier. I spent better than 10 years in it. As an individual, I know what is right and wrong. A lot of things that I saw about the Vietnam War were wrong. I saw no good coming out of it. Years later, Robert McNamara said we had no clear agenda.
And Robert McNamara was, at that time,
Secretary of the Army.
Secretary of the Army.
And he said we had no clear agenda in going to Vietnam. So there are a lot of things that were wrong. But like as I said in the beginning, a soldier doesn't have that luxury of deciding is he going or not. He's given orders, and he takes those orders.
Your first tour of duty, November 1967 through November 1968. How old were you then?
I was born in June 1945, so I was 23 at that
Young
time.
man.
Yes. I ended service right out of high school. I ended service in 63. So at that time, I had about 5 years in service. I was a sergeant. I was a squad leader, later platoon sergeant. A squad leader is in charge of a minimum 10 men. A platoon sergeant, he's in charge of 44 men.
Now, you are from East Dublin?
East Dublin, a section called Buckeye.
a section called Buckeye.
Community. I laughingly refer to a lot of people as Buckeye, Georgia, but Buckeye is just a community on the east side of the river.
I have much respect for Buckeye, and I am a fan of your sister, the poet, Frenchie Hodges. Now, before you entered the war, had you lived outside of Georgia before?
Except for when I was in service. I was stationed in different places before going to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I was stationed took basic at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. My first overseas assignment was Korea. I spent Christmas Day on a ship headed for Korea. And the day afterwards, we embarked on to South Korea. And I spent a year there and returned the following December of '64.
Well, I understand your thinking and respect that thinking of being a professional soldier, taking orders and following command, and you present yourself in that manner. But after you became older, let's say after the war, after returning to America, and then hearing the discussions from so many people, including the civil rights leader Martin Luther King, speaking so unfavorably about the war, did it cause you to feel insecure? Did it cause you to second guess what you had experienced?
I'm not one to look back and question things, so there was no regrets. It was a tour of duty, like I said, and what happened, happened. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't undo it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of good people lost their lives, and a lot of people were hurt. And but I had no problem with that. I had problems more with the treatment that I received after I got back, and their attempts to court-martial me, and all of those gave me more reason for concern than the war and other people's stance on it and what they thought being right or wrong, a war that was immoral or whatever.
Are you at liberty now to speak more about what you just referred to, returning to the United States and the court-martial process, et cetera, that you had to deal with?
My second tour was cut short because what had happened on my first tour had come to light. But when it came to light, the real story never came out. The story came out, this lieutenant was charged with murder, that he went into a village and just slaughtered these people. No one, it came out later that it was an operation, but no one dwelled on that fact. It was a well-planned and well-coordinated assault on a village. And what we were told that the Viet Cong were heavily fortified, the 48th BC Regiment was heavily fortified and dug in. And the night before, we were given instructions to triple our basic load of ammunition. A rifleman's basic load is 180 rounds of M16 ammunition. That was to be tripled.
Wow.
A machine gunner's basic load was 500 rounds. He was to triple that. The assistant gunner, his basic load was 600 rounds. He was to triple that.
Wow.
So everybody increased their basic load of ammunition because we were expecting heavy resistance.
Let's bring our audience in on this discussion. So on your first tour of duty, it was during that period of the Vietnam War where you as a soldier were engaged in what is now classic American war folklore. It's not folklore, it's fact. The My Lai event.
The My Lai massacre is what
it's more
commonly referred to.
And so you were a part of that. And you have been interviewed nationally as a result of your level of authority and your involvement regarding the My Lai massacre.
Yes.
And so it was your second tour of duty that was cut short where you were brought back to the States, and were you actually court-martialed as a result of your involvement with the My Lai massacre of your first tour?
The not actual court-martial was not convened. A 32 investigation, Article 32 investigation, which in military terms conveys to a grand jury hearing to see if the evidence will stand up in a court of law.
What was the result of that?
That the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. But the damage had already been done. The thinking of a lot of people in higher commands was that all these soldiers that are not court-martialed, they are no longer a liability to the military. They're no longer an asset to the military. They're a liability, so they should be discharged. So following the attempt to court-martial me, and I went on down to left Fort McPherson and went to Fort Benning, which is the home of the infantry, to put my career together, went to NCO school, got on the promotion list for the next higher grade, which was E7. I was an E6 at the time. After completing that school, when I got out, then my rights are read to me that under the Article 32 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that there are charges being brought against me for substandard conduct. These are not criminal charges. These are administrative charges. So I had to fight those, and the only way that I could fight those was to take them into federal court and get an injunction because they were determined to put me out. So they gave me a date to be discharged. So I got with my civilian lawyer, with a civilian lawyer who took the case pro bono, and we went into federal court in Columbus to block the discharge until the Army could come forward and say why they were taking this action. About 6 months later, the Army did come to the court, and what they said was Sergeant Hodges was not being discharged for substandard conduct at My Lai, even though I had paperwork to show. They said he's being discharged for the benefit of the government, which was a catch-all regulation. 31 instances where this can be used, but the Secretary of the Army could discharge anyone he liked at any time he liked and did not have to give a reason.
Well, it's interesting. I came prepared to interview you regarding your thoughts and your feelings germane to Martin Luther King's stance regarding the Vietnam War. And as much as I understand, the civil rights leaders at that time thought it was an unfair and unjust war, and that so many of our men, and I guess women, did any women serve in Vietnam?
Women served, but they served in background roles such as nurses and that sort.
Okay, so many of our soldiers were dying in a war that was, first of all, unwinnable, at a time when in the United States the civil rights movement was at its apex, and they thought that there should be more energies focused on what was happening here at home. But now you've introduced a different kind of color, or a different kind of chapter. So I want to ask you, and I want you to be as comfortable as you can be, are there bitterness, are there feelings of bitterness or discontent as to how you were treated from the government or from the military as a result of the war?
As far as bitterness, I don't harbor any hard feelings toward anyone because this was, quote, the establishment, this was the military doing this was the way things were done. And it all ended poorly because, like I said, they had no clear agenda in Vietnam. So other things turned out, they still have no clear agenda. So I don't hold any resentment or any hard feelings. It's hard for me. I can't direct it at any one person. So it's hard for me to carry those feelings directed towards the Army.
I know,
but that was an organization.
But doesn't that make emotions even more difficult?
Yes, but it left some scars.
That's what I would imagine.
But not of the kind of bitterness toward the Army, because that's an institution that I love and I still respect it. But the damage that was done, there's an anger quotient inside, not directed at anyone. And if you remember,
had to do a lot of work, haven't you?
Yes, but if you remember in that article,
yes,
there was the last page.
Yes,
I said that I referred to myself as not just a SOB, but a revolving SOB. That is, whichever way I turn. And that's not a flattering term, but that was me. That's the reality of it. And most days I'm fine. And with most people I'm fine until they get to an area where it really ticks me off about the way someone is. Not so much the way I'm treated, but how my veterans are treated.
Mm-hmm. Have you had much opportunity to go into the public schools in Dublin, or even the African American churches, or white churches for that matter, to share your story? Because I think your story is a fantastic story. This is the story of an African American man from Georgia who fought in a major war that was so unpopular in the United States, that was opposed by so many of our leaders, and yet you, in addition to having fought in that war, had to deal with recriminations from the government because of the My Lai massacre, and you've survived it all. And even though you call yourself a revolving SOB, I have found you to be absolutely a gentleman, a perfect Southern gentleman.
I have been invited to one high institution of higher living, and that was the college in Cochran, Georgia. And for about, I think about 5 years, I went every semester or quarter that they studied history, studied about the Vietnam. I went and talked to the classes. And on my very first trip there, I spoke with, when the professor, I was invited by one professor, and when the other professor found out, who had a class meeting at the same time, heard of this, he wanted his class on it. So I had two classes of approximately, I guess about 60, 65 people, plus the entire staff of the social studies department. I had them captivated for 2 hours.
So what about the pen? Have you thought about writing your biography, writing your story?
I have thought of it, but I'm not good with bringing it from my head to a pen. I've had several people offer to do it, but nothing has...
Because they have ghostwriters.
Yes, nothing has turned out. In fact, my sister was one of them, and that was a project that we were going to do, but we have never gotten around to it. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot that... I tell the story to a lot of people, and that gave me... There was always a desire of mine to be able to tell the story so people would understand what went on there, how we got to My Lai, and why... maybe explains why some of the things happened there. But like I said, we were told that the 48th VC Regiment was heavily fortified and dug in there. Additionally, they said that everybody in that village were the enemy. Either they were combatants or they were sympathetic to the Viet Cong, not to the South Vietnamese government.
We're talking with Kenneth Hodges, a Vietnam War veteran, a citizen of Dublin, and we are trying to dovetail his position now about the war, particularly as it relates to the position that was held by Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders. But our conversation has moved even more broadly, and I'd like for you, if you can, and I didn't prep you on this, but I have experienced you as being very bright and very quick. How do you contextualize the Vietnam War in light of all of the wars that have been fought by America? The Korean War, World War I, World War II, the conflicts we've had recently with Kuwait and Iraq, what we call the Kuwaiti War. Yeah, when you look at all of these skirmishes and wars, and you look at the Vietnam War, where does the Vietnam War fit in all of that for you?
It was not a conventional war.
It was
unconventional in the fact that it was fought in jungles. Some of it was fought in the streets of Saigon, but a lot of it was fought in the jungles and rice paddies of South Vietnam. You didn't always know who your enemy was until you were being fired on. In some instances, soldiers were ordered not to fire until they were fired upon. And by that time, a lot of times it was too late. Even though you might have, you knew he was a military-age male.
Correct.
Either he's a draft dodger, or he's the enemy, or he's a South Vietnamese soldier. Mm-hmm. But everybody dressed in, except for the soldiers, dressed in the same black pajamas and straw hat. So you didn't know unless it was an NVA. North Vietnamese Army, they dressed in regular uniforms. But the Viet Cong, They just wore whatever the peasants wore in the fields. And
So the Vietnam War, you regard as an unconventional war.
That's what I would classify as. It was an unconventional war because it was done in fighting that we had been trained for, but really were not allowed to go in and fight it.
Well,
there was no front line. The enemy was all around you.
So it was like you were dealing with terrorists.
Not necessarily.
What terrorists, but people who fought in jungles.
Well, you're dealing with snipers.
Snipers, that's what I was
trying
to get at.
You're dealing with people who are hiding themselves.
Hiding themselves.
They had minefields in certain areas. And you didn't know that because some of them were minefields that would set when the French were there. And that was back in the early 50s. So some of those minefields were still there, but uncharted. So you could walk into a minefield and not know it until someone stepped on a mine. And now you realize you don't know whether you're in the middle of a minefield or on the edge of it. All you know is you were in a minefield. And this is what happened just before My Lai. We hit a minefield going on patrol in that area. And there were 24 casualties, not killed, but 24 soldiers were wounded.
Right.
Out of that 24, 19 were wounded severely, like both legs or leg and an arm, but as a result of being in the minefield. And after getting the wounded out, we backtracked out of the minefield, and that's when they say something is in here. Let's find out. Let's do some intelligence reports and find out what's in here.
Do you have an appreciation for Dr. King's position about the war, or maybe if it's not an appreciation, do you have a sympathetic disposition towards his rationale for being opposed to the war? In other words, what I'm trying to ask you is, does Kenneth Hodges have a sense of understanding as to why Martin Luther King Jr. and so many Americans were unfavorable toward the war?
I have an appreciation and understanding of why Dr. King and others were opposed to it, because it was, looking back in hindsight, it was a unethical war. It was not a good war. And if there's such a thing as a good war, it was wrong.
You make me think of Sherman's quote, "War is hell."
War is definitely hell in many fronts. On the people that served there, during the service there and after their service.
But the reason why you're so valuable, not too many people survive hell. You survived.
I have survived, but there are scars. Most of those are emotional scars, but I have survived. I did those 2 tours without any physical scars. I didn't get wounded, didn't get shot, didn't get any shrapnel from mines or booby traps or anything. But there are some emotional scars. But I can only credit that to the good Lord for bringing me through with it.
You credit it to the good Lord.
A lot of soldiers.
Now that southern gem is coming out now.
A lot of soldiers, I've experienced it. I've been around. I haven't spent 39 years at the VA. A lot of soldiers can't.
Now, what do you mean you spent 39 years at the VA?
I worked 39 years.
Oh, you were an employee at the Veterans Administration Hospital?
Vincent VA Medical Center.
And this is the Carl Vinson here in Dublin?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And my last, when I started there, it was in the kitchen, and then later moved into housekeeping. We had a laundry at one time, and I worked in the laundry. But the job that I retired from, I was given that job in '78, and that was motor vehicle operator. And I was transporting patients that needed treatment that could not be gotten here in Dublin. Transported them to Augusta and to Decatur and to other facilities where necessary. We sometimes went out of state to Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And like I said, I had a lot of interaction with veterans, and a lot of Vietnam veterans cannot talk about their experiences. A lot of the World War II soldiers did not talk, period. The Korean War veterans, a lot of them didn't speak of their experiences. They came back and went to work. But a lot of those did suffer from the same problems that the Vietnam veteran had, and that was PTSD, but they didn't have a name for it.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And I don't want to push my boundaries, but has that been a problem for you?
That has been a problem for me. And the way it was explained to me by the psychiatrist, he says a normal reaction to an abnormal situation.
Wow, that is absolutely
some
good to...
soldiers, some people have have coping mechanisms that God gave them when they came into this world. And he said, for me, I have great coping skills, which has allowed me to function as well as I have without medication.
You referred to the good Lord.
That's the only way that I made it through on a day-to-day basis, and making it through now is by the help of the good Lord. He leads and guides me and directs my path.
Well. So I would encourage you as much as possible to do some writing, to tell your story. I know you're doing this interview with me. You are featured in the interview with PBS with My Lai. And I know that you were interviewed by Scott Thompson for the Courier Herald.
Right. There were others also.
Could you tell me about some of them?
Yes. An English television flew me to England, but that one was never aired. London Weekend Television. Okay. And a sister company took it up a few years later, and they came to America and filmed it. And that one won awards for Best Documentary.
And what was the name of that one?
I think it was 4 Hours at My Lai.
4 Hours at My Lai. Mm-hmm.
They did that one, and they did a follow-up a few years later. Memories Magazine did an article, and also People Magazine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you were to give a word of counsel to a young person entering the armed services today, what would be your word? Would you encourage them to join the armed services? What would you say to a young man that says, hey, Brother Hodges, I'm completing my high school diploma, I'm interested in serving in the military, what do you think?
I would encourage anyone that's interested in going into the military to pursue it as a career. There are a great many opportunities in the military for a person to advance. He can get training, he can get schooling, college, and everything else. We've had some right here in Dublin who joined, and one young lady is a general. Mm-hmm. She came from humble beginnings, such as myself, and she attained her education through the military. So I think this is a fine institution.
And a good career.
But always be diligent and work hard, and take God with you wherever you go. Mm-hmm. Because that is necessary to keep you grounded. Mm-hmm. But I would encourage him to go into the military and to just stay alert as to what is going on, what they're doing, and what is going on around them.
There's a question that has been hovering in my mind as we talk, and I couldn't grasp it because I was so attentive to listening to you, but now it has come to the surface. Are you in contact with any of your colleagues that you served with during the Vietnam War?
I'm in contact with several that I've served with in Vietnam. Some I served with in Vietnam, and others I met while I was in service. But there's one soldier, and he lives in Lakeland, Florida, and he was able to find me because I've never shied away from saying that I'm from Dublin, Georgia, Buckeye specific. And one day one Sunday, I had went into town, and on my way back home, I was almost home, and there's a little country store, and as I got to the stop sign, there was a fellow waving at me, and it was him. He had found his way. He was on his way to Tennessee on vacation, but he had found his way to Dublin, Georgia.
And he found Buckeye?
Found East Dublin, and found Buckeye, and GPS was not on the scene at that time. But he stopped and asked questions. Do you know Kenneth Hodges? Do you know where Buckeye is?
Tell me a little bit more. Was he one of the soldiers that you were responsible for?
He was one of the soldiers that I was responsible for. He was one of my squad, and later of the same platoon when I was platoon sergeant. But we met in Hawaii before going to Vietnam. We trained together for approximately a year before going to Vietnam, and we parted ways after that first tour. We met up again after my second tour in Atlanta. Both of us pending charges.
Really?
Pending court martial.
And what was his result?
They dropped the charges due to insufficient evidence.
Okay. According to the documentary that I viewed, only one person actually received charges?
No, all of us received charges. There was one that was there were several that were court-martialed.
Correct.
Only one was given a sentence, convicted and given a sentence, and that was William Calley.
Right.
And he did not grant interviews. And about 2 years ago, he made a public statement that he was sorry for his actions there. And I regret that he feels that he was sorry for his actions there. He was only following orders, and maybe somebody says that's a cop-out, but that's what a soldier does, is receives, obeys, and carry out orders.
And what was Sergeant Calley? Is that
Lieutenant Calley. He was a
and what was
leader.
his sentence?
Life in prison. Later, on the first appeal, it was reduced to 20 years. On his second appeal, it was reduced to 10 years, and by that time, he had served a third of a 10-year sentence, so they let him out on parole. But he forfeited all pay and allowances and was given a dishonorable discharge. He's not even entitled to a flag when he's buried.
My.
But all soldiers are entitled to a flag.
But he is not.
But he's not.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking to Kenneth Hodges, a native of Dublin, Georgia, and more specifically, Buckeye, a veteran of the Vietnam War, a war that was opposed by Martin Luther King Jr. and many other civil rights era leaders. Kenneth Hodges has been very articulate about understanding the opposition to the war, but even more articulate, in my opinion, about the professional job that a soldier is called to do. But one thing stands out for me in this moment, and that is your consciousness that during Vietnam, even before Vietnam, and even now after Vietnam, there is a presence that has been guiding you, a presence that has been keeping you. You refer to it as the good Lord.
That's it.
Would you say more?
I've always known, after becoming a man, and I say somewhere around 18, 19, 20 years old, after I entered the military, I felt that there was a power in this world that was keeping me alive, that was guiding me. And I still feel today that he has work for me to do because I'm still here. I survived 2 tours in Vietnam and fairly sane now that it's over. Moreover, the court-martial, and then finding out through the internet that behind all of this, the My Lai massacre,
correct,
was the CIA. Operation Phoenix. That is what that particular operation was about. There were people in that village that were sympathizers, were giving aid to the enemy. They wanted that entire village wiped out. Because the order was kill or destroy everything in the village. Kill the pigs, drop them in the well, pollute the well water, kill the chickens, cut down the banana trees, do a quick search on the hooches, and burn them. But everything in that village was to be killed. No, they did not say old men, women, and children. But in fact, that's what it came down to. We received a body count of 128 after the operation is over. A year later, when it hit the fan, that's the same number we were accused of murdering. The real number are like 504 people in that village lost their lives.
Well, Mr. Hodges, may the good Lord continue to be with you, and may your story be told not only now but for generations to come. so that our young men and women will know that there is a way out of hell and a way to a life that reflects someone like you, calm, sane, and a gentleman SOB. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us with At Home in Dublin with Ricky Porter. Our guest this evening has been Kenneth Hodges.